served as a member on that task force, and there was unanimous agreement after a great deal of review of the literature and looking at other models and frameworks for information literacy that the current standards should not be reapproved as they stand. We had been given the choice of reapproving them or changing them or jettisoning them. And so we recommended this extensive revision. And let me just go over a bit about what this previous task force thought was really important. One of the things that we thought was that it should be really readily understood and simplified because we really want faculty members and others in the academic environment to be able to understand and to participate, perhaps more than has been the case in the past. And so the simplification, and part of that is the next bullet, which is getting rid of any library jargon so that, again, it would not just appeal to librarians, but to the others that we need to work with for this information literacy instruction. One of the elements that we thought strongly about, but also had been brought to our attention by a number of others, was the fact that the current standards really are mostly based on cognitive learning outcomes, and the affective or emotional learning outcomes really are very important, things that address self-efficacy, student confidence, attitudes, motivation, and valuing what is being learned. This is really important to have in whatever document is produced. A lot of librarians are actually already doing this, but we need to support it in wider campus discussions with faculty and administrators. Okay. It was also felt that it's important to acknowledge complementary literacies, and meta-literacy was one of the ones, well, actually was one that was focused upon because there's the need to unify relevant literacies. It's seen that digital literacy, visual literacy, media literacy are all important, but rather than, and need to be sort of encompassed under the information literacy umbrella. However, dealing with each of these separately is difficult, and meta-literacy does provide a way around that. Okay. There was the feeling that format, because formats it's opened up so dramatically that sort of the simplistic focus on one particular print format really no longer works for us. The role of student as content creator is something that's been brought about, as we all know, by the internet. And so students can independently author, create, and distribute content. But there's a number of sort of abilities and dispositions that are needed in connection with this that are different from just being a consumer of information. Okay. The next to last one is the role of student as, or learner as content curator. And in this case, you know, the online environment has democratized the creation and curation of personal information collections. So it's really important that students can curate the information they found. And the last item here is that the AASL standards have changed, and one of the original goals of our information literacy standards was to sort of mesh with that, but because theirs has really changed, we need to provide some sort of continuity with the AASL standards. So that was something else that uh, the previous task force decided that would be very important to include.
So what we've been thinking about, based on the recommendations of the previous task force, that we're looking for a new model to provide a more holistic approach to information literacy for everyone in the higher ed community, not just librarians. I think sometimes we may have conveyed the message that the current standards, as valuable as they might have been, as being something that was just only for librarians. And I think what we're trying to do is to be more inclusive. And that this new model also would need to acknowledge that the abilities, knowledge, and motivation surrounding information literacy are for all college students and actually for all levels of education because of the very nature of the information environment that we're currently dealing with. And also this issue of collaboration that I've already alluded to. We really need to create a new model that would allow faculty members and librarians to work together and to find a way to collaborate more centrally on disciplinary content and bring information literacy into that arena of disciplinary content. So we have been discussing recently on the task force two key elements: threshold concepts and meta-literacy, and perhaps ways of using this to help create this new model. There's already been work done, some very good work done on threshold concepts, and I should just explain briefly what those are. There's a definition here on the slide. I'm not necessarily going to read all of it, but these came out of research in the UK that really have, as faculty or disciplinary faculty, have identified concepts in their disciplines that are called gateway or portal concepts to other content in their disciplines. In other words, when students grasp these underpinnings, they're able more readily to learn everything else in the discipline. So there has been a lot of work occurring recently in this whole arena. There have been international conferences on it, and actually one of the members of our task force, Lori Townsend, has been working with others on a Delphi process recently to identify threshold concepts in information literacy itself. And we think there's a great deal of potential in using those to create a new model that would help us be much more open-ended and expansive in thinking about information literacy in the future. So threshold concepts have certain characteristics, and these grew out of the work of Meyer and Land in the UK. They have said that they are truly transformative. They cause the learner to experience a shift in perspective. They're integrative. They're able to bring together separate concepts within the discipline into a unified whole. So students are able to learn or their content much more readily once they grasp the threshold concepts. And once they learn these, they don't go back to an earlier level of understanding. And that these are bounded in the sense that these are perhaps probably specific to the discipline itself. And we probably know this from our own experience just in teaching, that a lot of new concepts that we try to work with students are difficult for them at first, and it takes them a while to grasp it, and sometimes these concepts suddenly emerge for students as an aha moment, or they struggle with them over a period of time, but after they learn them, they're much more able or capable of learning other content in the discipline. So threshold concepts really are about getting past those gaps in understanding or the roadblocks to learning.
Okay. And meta-literacy, which I've already mentioned, ties in extremely well both to issues that were raised in the previous task force, as well as with threshold concepts, as we're looking at meta-literacy and threshold concepts. There's areas of overlap. And just to talk a little bit more about meta-literacy, Tom Mackey and I sort of came up with this as a way of sort of going beyond sort of information literacy as it has been, sort of the standards as they are, and sort of looking at today's information environment, that students as content creators is a big part of this. Social media really opens up a whole new way for people to publish, to present their ideas, to collaborate. And this is very, very important, but it's a very different role, as I said before. But it's also looking at these participatory sort of digital environments as a whole, rather than the discrete parts. And I'm just going to read something brief from an article about meta-literacy that might help with this, and that social media environments are transient, collaborative, and free-flowing, requiring a comprehensive understanding of information to critically evaluate, share, and produce content in multiple forms. Within this context, information is not a static object that is simply accessed and retrieved. It is a dynamic entity that is produced and shared collaboratively with such innovative Web 2.0 technologies such as, and you can sort of provide that list as they are constantly changing. So this is something that we think is an important element that ties in very well. And within meta-literacy learning, there was some work done by a meta-literacy learning collaborative, and I see that Mike Daly, who's a member of it, is one of the people here today, but came up with 4 domains within meta-literacy learning, and none of this is going to be terribly surprising, but the behavioral, the cognitive, the affective, which again goes back to the report of the previous task force, and the metacognitive, which I think is very important about sort of learners thinking about their own thinking and the processes that they undergo, what they do and don't know. And this can tie in very well with threshold concepts as well. So just to give you a bit of an overview on the timeline, so we are obviously holding open forums right now, and for December 1st, plan to have a draft document which will be available on the site that ACRL has put up, so that there would be something more concrete than we're able to present in these online meetings for people to read over, think about, react to. There will be in mid-December and in mid-January, we think, online hearings or forums about them. And again, at midwinter, and I understand that a room for 300 people has been booked. So we're expecting a lot. We had quite a few at annual, and the room was a bit too small. And there was the deadline in February for the comments on the draft. Throughout, we are providing reports to the ACRL board on the process. We do have Julie Garrison, who is a member of the ACRL board, is on our task force, and so there's two-way communication there, and that will continue through the rest of the process. And in late spring, we need to share the draft or near final draft with 2 different ACRL committees. There's an Information Literacy Standards Committee and the ACRL Standards Committee, and it's a bit confusing, and we do have people who can explain further if need be. But then there's also a final report to the ACRL board in June. And so that's sort of the timeline. It's fairly ambitious timeline, but we do hope to make it. And the last slide we have are just references for the two items that we had included earlier. At this point, we can take questions if people would like to type them into the chat box. And there is one from Trevor Dawes who mentions that that June is the target date, and it will depend on how the process is going. Thanks, Trevor.
So are there other questions?
Okay. Let's see. I see one from Ramchandran. Is there a concerted effort to include multicultural literacy, financial literacy, media literacy, and wellness literacy within the expanded scope of information literacy? Craig, do you want to try to do that one, or shall I?
Well, I think what we had to have some boundaries around what we're doing, and it is a very complex endeavor. But we're not, for example, addressing financial literacy. I know we're not addressing some of the other literacies. I think some aspects of multiculturalism probably would connect with some of what we're doing, but we are really trying to bring together these two notions of the threshold concepts plus the meta-literacies that Trudy described earlier into a coherent framework. We know that there are connections with this type of learning with many other aspects of learning. It's just that we do need some boundaries.
And while meta-literacy doesn't specifically address all of these, the intent is for it to be sort of comprehensive, sort of about the roles and the needs of people to think about what it is that they need. So they might need to go beyond some of the things that are specifically included to some that you've mentioned. And there was a question about a blog. And we have a wiki that we're using within the task force, but we don't currently have a blog. And I don't know if somebody from ACRL might want to address perhaps whether that might be possible. Okay, so we could have a blog on the site that has been set up at ACRL. Amy, you mentioned that you're in the middle of a project that addresses 5 of what will be the old standards, and how do you work with your administrators to make this work not moot while advocating for the new standards? And I think that's a question that probably a good number of people are thinking about. It's certainly something that we have talked about. Craig, is your hand raised?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. All right. And one of the things we talked about was the possibility of sort of transitioning and perhaps keeping the old standards for a bit to keep for people who are involved in the middle of things. I certainly think that there's going to be connections between the old standards and what we're doing might look quite different. Craig, do you have more you want to add?
Yeah, I recognize this as a reality. I think we all do, because a lot of the current work that has been going on with the current standards will need to continue. So we think there may be a period of time where there would be parallel kinds of projects, and for some institutions, some aspects of the current standards are certainly will continue to be very, very important and valuable and useful. We're trying to provide a framework for the future, so I think there probably will be a period of years where some institutions will be using some for some purposes, but perhaps when they have another opportunity to do reaccreditation or to do some new curriculum revision project, that the new framework that we're talking about might come into play at that point.
Okay. There's a question about membership on the committee, and Craig, do you want to just go over? Some people may have come in after you talked about the non-librarians who are on the task force.
Okay, so there are several non-librarians. We have Ellie Fogarty from the Middle States Commission. I don't have the list back here.
Okay, yep.
But we have, we can go back and look at the list. We have Alan Georgi, who's the Chief Academic Technology Officer at the University of Miami, and Jordan Horowitz, who's with the foundation, the Institute for Evidence-Based Change in San Francisco, and of course many people know Joan Lippincott, who's with CNI, is a librarian, and Bill Robertson at SUNY Albany, who's the director for the Center for the Institute for Teaching and Learning and Academic Leadership there. I think I may have covered the non-librarians on the group. So yes, we were attempting to be very collaborative with and having people from outside librarianship help us think this through.
Yeah, and one of the tensions that we were under was trying to be as representative as possible, but also trying to keep the task force to a size where we could actually have meetings online, trying to get everybody scheduled together. So I think what we tried to do was sort of compromise on and not go too large. But Cornell University has asked, have we talked to students and or faculty concerning these standards? And we have talked, and I know I certainly have talked to a number of faculty members about threshold concepts. We don't have anything extremely concrete to show them at this point, but what I am finding is that the threshold concepts really resonate with them, and they want to learn more, which I think is a really a good sign. And I can't speak for the rest of the task force members. Again, we're working on trying to get sort of a format that we could then get more feedback on.
I see there's a question here about sample assignments being included with the revised standards, and I think the format that we're looking at right now would have suggested assessments or assignments, just by way of suggestion, that would go with threshold concepts, for example. I'm looking through other questions here. Now, there's a question about remedial and returning students who may not have the technical skills necessary. That's a really interesting question. The remedial and returning students and the need to address, I think we would need to work with other community organizations and our K through 12 there as well, and others, to have perhaps a parallel set of competencies that we would want, and those would perhaps need to be addressed through whatever vehicles for instruction that local institutions would develop, but that would be entirely up to them.
Okay, and I see a question, will the format of the competencies be similar to the past outcomes, behaviors, etc., or will this be changed to be more broad in understanding and ability to be assessed? And the formats that we're considering at this point are different from the previous ones. Again, we're thinking back to the work that was done by the previous task force, where there's sort of an enormous literature review. There was the idea that this needs to be sort of simplified so that it would be more approachable by others beyond librarians. And so we're trying to think sort of outside the box of the previous set. We are thinking about domains, dispositions. Dispositions are something that come through in the AASL 21st Century Learners document. So I guess what we'd say is it's probably going to look rather different, but we don't know exactly what it's going to look like.
We thought that it might look a little bit more like a toolkit rather than just a list of standards that we would have. We would have exemplars and we would have examples of application at different levels of how concepts and skills working together might be used. But we're looking at a very simplified framework right now. That's our first step.
And a question about operationalizing these new standards. To go along with the toolkit idea that Craig just mentioned, we've talked about the idea of like a sandbox, an online sandbox type of thing, where people who are using certain elements of them and have found ways that work really well could put up that information. It's just an idea exchange area to go beyond what we're able to do in the document that we produce. And we're just continuing to look at questions. Okay.
I see a whole need for developing, and this may be even the work of a future group. Somebody has asked about assessment of using this new framework, and we certainly are aware of this as an interesting challenge for us, but we think that it perhaps could be done through sample assessments or sampling of students. I mean, and some things could be done once students are actually enrolled in curriculum. The question here is about assessing new students right at the outset. So again, that might involve some work or collaboration with AASL or other organizations if we're talking about first-year students.
There's a good point actually from one of our task force members about for operationalizing them, that this is really going to sort of be dependent upon your own institutions. I think sharing ideas is a great way to go. I mean, librarians always do that, but everybody's situation is different. Whether you're teaching a credit-bearing course to having the opportunity to do course-infused instruction or course-related instruction. So I think it's going to vary quite a bit. Thank you, Troy. Okay. holistic program or one-shot.
I think what we're thinking about there are exemplars, again, threshold concepts of meta literacies and examples of how those can be used in the curriculum. There will have to be some careful thought about how these might be used with one-shot sessions, because we recognize the reality that many people, many librarians still teach a lot of one-shot sessions. I think what we hope to see in the future is more collaboration around assignments and working together, more collaboration between librarians and faculty members on assignment design. And I think this would allow a deeper combination of the new framework with disciplinary content.
And our hope is that because we really want this to be something that non-library faculty members will buy into, and I know that's always the hope, but if it's written in a way that might really engage them, then perhaps there will be somewhat fewer of the one-shot sessions, or if they continue to have that amount of time with a librarian, there might be much more infused within the course where a librarian would have more say about it. There's a question from Donna about working with accreditation agencies, and well, Ellie is from Middle States, and we do have somebody who is working on outreach, and so people beyond librarians have been invited to these open forums, but Kate is also sort of putting together a plan to reach key stakeholders. So that is certainly something that we're well aware of. I wanted to just go back to a question that I saw earlier, and I may not be getting it exactly since I'm not quite sure where it is. We have two lists of question and answers in chat, but one about something about sort of skills versus the cognitive aspect of it. And I think with our interest in the threshold concepts that there's going to be somewhat less focus on skills per se. I mean, there's sort of important things that people, the abilities that they need to do. I think we're trying to stay away from the word skill. But I think we want to make this more sort of all-encompassing rather than small individual skills.
Yes, I think we've been thinking about another term to substitute for skills that really relates to abilities, such as practices that are higher level or that are more generic.
So as for influencing the discipline-specific competencies, I just think because there may be quite an influence, this we expect is going to look very different, and it's going to be different in its sort of scope. So there may need to be other changes over time that reflect the work that this task force is doing. Craig, do you see other questions?
I think we may have addressed the highlights here. I hope we're not missing anything.
Okay, I do see one from Cornell about integrating the recently created visual literacy standards, and I think that goes back to the meta-literacy component, where we're not going to be addressing each type of literacy, but trying to make things cohesive so that the format is not sort of the driver, that these sort of abilities and understandings should be more universal. Cornell's asking if we've discussed the use of the term information literacy itself.
I think that has come up.
It has come up.
It has come up in passing. And we have said that we probably want to provide a definition and a preface to the document that we eventually produce. So that is something we will need to do.
But I don't think that we've been, well, we certainly have not been spending a lot of time about thinking about another term. So if you had something that we've missed, maybe if you want to type it in again, we've got, as I said, 2 very, very long lists of questions, and sharing a few of the threshold concepts as examples. Okay, Susan? The Delphi process that Craig mentioned that Lori Townsend and her colleagues are undertaking, sort of refining the list. They have published 2 articles, one of which is in the bibliography, and let me go back to that. So there's some changes going on here, and they've been working with, I don't know the exact number, but a fair number of sort of well-known names in the field of information literacy to sort of test out whether the ones that they proposed are actually what others consider to be threshold concepts. Are there other threshold concepts that were not originally included? And so they are sort of, the list as given in their articles is changed a bit, but one of them is format. And so that format should really, and that's one piece of paper that I don't have in front of me. Craig, do you want to go with your conversation one, or
format as a process,
right?
And then there is one that addresses scholarship and what scholarship is, and what scholarship really is a conversation over time among scholars, and the students need to understand the discourse of a discipline and how pieces of scholarship fit within it. So that's an example of another one.
Okay. Emily, you asked about why content creator and not writer. That wording came from the previous group, and so I'm not sure how it's going to be reflected in what we're doing. Creator perhaps was because we're looking at things beyond writing. It could be creating videos or audio or some other type of material where writer might not fit quite as well, but that's something that we'll need to look at as what we're doing comes together more. Okay, and there's a question from Grand Valley State University. Doesn't seem like a comprehensive body of research on which to base these revisions. What else are we considering as we redesign, and are we thinking about the research being done in the UK? Craig, you were involved with the first set of standards, even if it was a bit later. Do you want to talk about how that came about? And it wasn't really research.
That whole process grew, again, a group of well-known experts talked about what they were aware of the research literature and in the field at that time, and also they were aware of the new format for standards that were being developed widely at various levels of education during that time period. So the standards that we've been using really reflect the time period of the 1990s, and they certainly were aware. The people who put them together, the people who were on that original task force, were aware of the best thinking out there in the profession, and that's why the standards that we've been using kind of draw on the research literature, I guess you'd say, at a very high level. But I don't think they spent a huge amount of time looking at individual pieces of research. It was much more of a synthesis.
And the previous task force did spend a great deal of a year sort of looking at a number of different models. We looked at the 7 pillars of information literacy, which many of us are fans of, but there's some other ideas that are coming out. So again, there's a variety of expertise on this task force, and but what we did not want to do was to redo all of the research that the previous group spent so much time doing. And there are 2 of us on this task force that were on the previous one. There's a question from a Grand Valley State University librarian. Are we set on using the threshold concepts as the basis for the new standards, or is that still up for discussion?
We think that this probably is a promising model when we combine it with meta-literacies, because we think that it is going to address the future. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's totally set at this point, but we think there's at least a fair amount of potential to use them. We need to think about how we create some implementation scenarios and how we actually explain what the individual threshold concepts are individually, and the group that's been working through the Delphi process has been doing that. So we're calling on what they're doing as well to help us in this process.
And I just, I'm just one person, but I want to reiterate the interest I've gotten from faculty members from a wide variety of disciplines here at the UAlbany campus when I've talked about these threshold concepts. And a number of them have asked me for the articles on threshold concepts for information literacy. Some of them are quite familiar with threshold concepts in their own disciplines, and it's an idea that seems to really engage them, which just excites me no end. One of the questions that came in just before, let me see, from Wanda, how the new standards might help move us away from one-shots. And I think that those that we're collaborating with, the faculty members, really need to see the value and importance of what it is we're helping students to learn. And if this is a way of getting there, I think that it shows great potential.
So in a way, what we're trying to do is just expand the boundaries of faculty and librarian collaboration. I know there are political realities with that at each institution. We're trying to create space at a high level, conceptual level, for collaboration to occur through a new model.
Is there anything else that we can try to address?
Well, we really do want to thank everybody for their interest and their participation, and for the many good questions that have been asked, I think, which will help the task force as it moves along in its work.
Okay.
Here's another question that just yeah, so there's another connection with a disciplinary. I think there's potential there to collaborate with other with discipline-specific accrediting bodies, because they're also having to address the same issue of at least a core concepts in a particular field.
Angela just asked about what are our thoughts on faculty and disciplines other than libraries teaching actual information literacy courses. Here at the University at Albany, we're actually undergoing a big change from we've had some faculty members outside the library teaching information literacy courses, but it's now moving into the information literacy, oral discourse, advanced writing are all moving into the majors. And so each major has to certify sort of how they are accomplishing this. And there's all different sorts of models that are going to be happening when this is up and running next fall. And so we're actually going to be seeing this happen here, which is part of the reason that I really need to get the faculty members engaged in information literacy. Many of them feel that information literacy is how do you find a book, how do you find an article, how do you search a database? And it's a very, very limited view. And the threshold concepts, meta-literacy, some of the other things that we're looking at really help them to see that it's a much bigger initiative. And so putting in, you know, a couple of 20-minute things in the course of their entire major is not going to do it.
I see there's a question here that we need to think about more needs assessment tools for libraries. I would agree with that. I assume that really means needs assessment tools for instruction or information literacy. So yes, I would agree with that. Oh, and library assignments, yes.
Yeah. From Angela, have any faculty developed their own information literacy credit-bearing courses? Here at the University at Albany, yes. Faculty members in East Asian Studies developed courses in information literacy for both Japanese and Chinese. They did work from the model of the course that we teach in the library. That was, I think, a particularly good model. I mean, not our, because they looked at what we did and then incorporated all the disciplinary things, it worked out really well. Then there have been others that have not been quite so successful.
There's a question about primary sources, and certainly that it continues to be a challenge in teaching students primary sources, and I think we will have to think about how that would fit within this framework because there's of the list of threshold concepts that we've been looking at least up till now, primary sources are not. Primary sources, and what a primary source is of course a concept that students need to understand once they get in particular disciplines, and it varies so much from discipline to discipline, but I think we will need to at least address that in perhaps an expanded list of threshold concepts, or maybe subordinate concepts that connect with a particular threshold concept.
And Susan's wondering about institutions that are not as collaborative and how might the new standards help. And I think that, I think I'm beginning to sound sort of like a broken record, but if we can engage non-library faculty in the conversation and have them see real benefits to their students for their discipline based on what they're learning, I think it'll ease the way and perhaps have more collaboration help. I do think, too, if we're able to get that sandbox idea going, and if people can sort of share things that have worked at their own institutions, that, you know, it could be a really, really helpful resource, because we do not want to make this document, whatever it is, be so all-encompassing that it, you know, ends up being 20 pages. You know, there's going to be some things that we're just not going to be able to cover as comprehensively, but hopefully conversations amongst ourselves, we can address a lot of that.
I see there's a question there about, from Andy, about training and pedagogy and need help with teaching tools. You know, we would, that's again, perhaps is a little bit beyond the scope of what we would hope to do, but even if we were thinking about particular implementation scenarios with a particular threshold concept, we could have suggestions about teaching specific a type of pedagogy that might go along with teaching that particular threshold concept. We're still discussing that on the task force, but I think there are other resources out there as well on training and pedagogy that would need to be referenced in the document that we produce. So thanks for that question, though.
And Claudia, I see your question about will the newly revised standards include language which reflects embedding librarians in the online course environment and distance education. And I think we were seeing this as being pertinent to all learning environments.
Yes, yeah.
So we really appreciate all the questions that you've asked us. As Craig mentioned earlier, this really assists us as we're thinking about things. We had a couple of task force members were here today. We're having a task force meeting a little later this afternoon. And so it will help us as we're thinking about the process going forward. And there will be additional opportunities to comment.
Yes, we really do appreciate all of your questions. They're really helping us.
Oh, and Tracy, you asked about the meta-literacy book. Hopefully towards the end of the year, beginning of next year. Thanks for asking.
So are there any other final comments or questions? Well, if not, we really do appreciate your participation and interest, and we look forward to hearing more from you and what other ways we can hear from you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.